So we all hear the term Zoom fatigue a lot, but sometimes meetings will fly by or they're actually entertaining and they're not draining. So what is going on there? Is it that we're actually experiencing Zoom fatigue, or are we just in a boring meeting that is actually draining us? And one of the reasons that I bring this up is that earlier this year, I heard someone argue that Zoom fatigue is not actually a thing. We're just stuck in boring meetings. And their argument was, well, you don't hear people complaining about Netflix fatigue. They're perfectly fine sitting in front of a screen when they're watching Netflix. And I kind of thought, you know what? A lot of people have not taken the time as a host to learn how to run a good meeting. So maybe we're just not doing it right. And I thought, sometimes I'm stuck in a meeting in person and it is just as draining as some of these Zoom meetings. So as a person who teaches how to make more engaging meetings, I thought, yeah, I think there's something to that. However, around a month later, some research came out that argued that yes, in fact, video conferencing is more draining and exhausting on people, and they shared a few reasons why. So today, when we talk about whether or not Zoom fatigue is real, I'm going to share what the research says, but I'm also going to share a technique that I use for virtual presenting that I think actually helps alleviate some of the different causes for this Zoom fatigue and why people feel so drained. So that is what we are going to talk about today. If you are new and you have not met me before, my name is Kat and I help people to create more professional and engaging online presentations. And obviously, this is an interesting topic for me. My goal is to try to get all of you to run a better meeting, run a better presentation so that people are engaged, people are present, they actually care about what's going on, and they're surprised when it ends because they thought, oh, that went quicker than I thought. So that's always the goal. But let's actually discuss it. What did the research say? So the research was done at Stanford. And now I'm saying, why is Zoom extra draining? But in actual fact, this is for any sort of video conferencing technology that we are using to replace in-person meetings. And in this research, they narrowed it down to 4 primary reasons that they believe that this virtual format is more exhausting for individuals. So what is the first reason? Well, one is you're looking at a screen of people who are looking back at you. So they said that excessive amounts of close-up eye contact is highly intense for us. So if you imagine right now, we were sitting in a room, or maybe I was presenting about Zoom fatigue in person in real life, which by the way, that would be awesome. But let's say we're all in a room together. Chances are everyone listening is looking forward. Anytime you picture being in a meeting or a room or a presentation, usually eyes are on the person who is speaking. If someone else talks, we usually all turn and look at the other person that is speaking, but we're not all staring at each other. And yeah, this seems like a reasonable thing, that it is not normal for us to see every single person's face looking in our direction, even when we are not the person speaking. So that is the first reason that they said it's particularly more draining. The second reason is seeing yourself in the video chat. So when you are constantly seeing yourself in real time, that is unnatural. If we were in person right now, even if we were about to start a meeting or a presentation, chances are you would go look in the mirror, make sure you don't have anything in your teeth and that you look presentable, and then you walk in the room and that's the end of it. You would never demand to have a mirror of yourself while you're presenting, or if you're in a meeting just talking to other people, we don't see ourselves. And that's usually how we operate. But when you are in a Zoom meeting, you can see yourself, and often, let's be honest, we spend more time than we probably like to admit looking at our own Zoom window. That is just reality. We tend to be drawn towards it, whether it's because we're nervous of how we look or how we're coming across, or whether we're just drawn to seeing our own face because we're not used to seeing it. That's just a reality. And when you tell people that you can hide self-view, there's usually a little bit of panic. And people say, oh, but I can't hide self-view. And I would say, well, can you walk into a meeting in person and not look at yourself? So yes, you can absolutely hide self-view. Also, this is one advantage to Google Hangouts, is you see yourself before you enter the meeting, and then you don't see yourself anymore. So that is one thing that they are doing to help with this. Now, the next reason that they found, the third reason, is video chats dramatically reduce our usual mobility. So we're sort of locked in to a little box, literally, and we don't have the chance to move around as much. And I do find this to be draining for me, to kind of be stuck in a seat. I often find myself fidgeting a little bit. However, I would also argue that in real life, the same thing happens. If I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm usually sitting in that chair for the entire meeting. Or if I go to a conference presentation, I sit down for the duration of the presentation. Yes, we move in between, and potentially if we are having those longer virtual meetings, we might be sitting longer than we normally would when we are in person. Most people naturally will gravitate towards a break for everyone, and those are things that we could definitely build into presentations. So what's the final reason that they found in this research? Well, the cognitive load is higher in video chats as compared to in person. Meaning, when you are sitting in a room or you're standing with a person and they make an expression or a comment or something, our brain automatically registers it. Like when we're face to face with somebody, we catch on to their meaning, we catch on to nuances, we catch on to emotion a lot faster. The research kind of mentions, imagine you are sitting in a room, you're in a physical meeting with someone, and you and the person beside each other kind of glance because you share a reaction to something that was just said. You instantaneously catch on to that and you know the meaning behind that. That starts to go away when we are in these virtual formats. First of all, we can't always see the person that we're looking at, so we don't see everyone at one time. So we're kind of glancing around trying to figure out who it is that maybe made the thing, or if somebody has a reaction in the chat and we don't know what it's related to. It's more demanding and it takes more of a toll on us to actually process that information. Whereas when we're in person, that happens more naturally and quickly. And we actually read faces differently in person as we do online. And so that is something that is extra draining. So I don't know if any of you in particular find one of these worse than the others. Maybe let me know in the chat if you're here now, which one you find actually to be the most draining, if you're conscious of it, and maybe how much, if you're willing to admit, you look at yourself. I 100% am guilty of that. I did actually find when that hide self view came out and I started to use it, I did focus more on the other person on the call. However, one of my recommended techniques for virtual presenting is something that can actually help with some of these. So if we take a look at all 4 of these reasons, the short form, we've got the close-up eye contact, everyone looking your direction. We have seeing yourself on camera. We have your limited mobility, and we have your cognitive load. Well, personally, in my opinion, and this is totally a working theory, I have not tested this, I have not researched this, but I always recommend that you look into the camera, not only when you're speaking, but when other people are speaking. And I know that this makes people nervous. And people say, but then I won't see their faces. And we'll talk about that in a second. But when you are looking into the camera, like I'm doing right now, you can tell that I'm talking directly to you, even though I can't see you. I'm connecting through a camera by looking directly at you. When you are talking to me on calls, I really try to look at the camera as a way of signaling that I am listening to you, so that you get to see a pair of eyes who are actually looking directly at you and listening to what you are saying. Yes, that means I am not looking at you on the screen, but I am really listening to you. Chances are, if I am looking into my camera, it means I'm not looking at anything else. I'm not reading my email. I'm not distracted in the chat. I am actually focusing on what you are saying. And it is more like a phone call, which I will get back to in a second. So I know that when I talk about looking in the camera, people get nervous, and we're going to address that. But when you look at this list here, the close-up eye contact, if you're looking in a camera, you're actually not looking at all those eyes staring back at you. Instead, you're looking into a black dot. When it comes to seeing yourself, when you're looking at the camera, you're actually not staring at yourself unless you have yourself on a teleprompter. But even then, right now, my face is on a teleprompter, but I'm not looking at my face. I'm looking at the center of the screen where I know the camera is. When we look at cognitive load, trying to process what a person is saying and what they're doing and put those things together, that's also reduced because I'm actually just paying attention to the voice and what a person's saying. And I'm listening for the emotion and the tone and the nuance that you can hear from a person's voice when they are talking. I can't do anything about the limited mobility when it comes to eye contact. That's just not a thing. But for the other three, I genuinely feel like looking in the camera most of the time is going to actually reduce some of those things. So I know the first thing people will say is, but I need to see their reaction. How can I look at the camera when I'm listening to someone and I can't actually see them? Or when I'm talking, I want to be able to see people's reactions and their facial expressions. And first I would say, you don't have to look at the camera every single moment of your presentation. You can glance down and you can look down at people. However, I would say, try to start thinking about it like a telephone call. Do you remember what those are? I know we don't do them as much, but I used to spend hours and hours on the phone and I could connect with a person. Yes, real life is better. Being in person with someone is always better. However, you can catch on to a person's emotion. You can catch on if something's maybe not quite right, or maybe if someone's withholding or holding back. You can tell if someone is excited. All those things come through on a phone. So I would challenge, if you are really, really anxious at the idea of looking into the camera when someone else is speaking, I would actually say, just treat it like a phone call and really just listen to the words that they're saying and listen to the emotion and listen to all those other nuances that come from how we express ourselves when we are speaking, when another person is speaking, because that has absolutely helped me. So I'm going to take a look. I see that I'm really behind in the chat, but let's take a look at some of the comments that we have for the people who are here too. So I see when it comes to turning off self-view, Patrick is saying there's always a fear that your video is off or something is wrong. And it's funny because why would we suddenly think that something will go wrong? And why would we think that nobody would tell us if something suddenly went wrong? And I get the appeal of being able to see yourself. And I get the fear of turning off self-view. So with looking at the camera, you don't have to turn off self-view. Just focus more on the camera than focusing on yourself. And yeah, and Marcus you are absolutely right. That horrible thing of just sitting through somebody flipping through slides the entire time, that is draining. You know what though? That's draining in person. And I think early on when I heard this argument about, it's not, Zoom fatigue isn't real, it's just boring meetings. And I thought, yeah, you know what? I actually find it really draining to be in a bunch of back-to-back in-person meetings, just like being in a bunch of back-to-back virtual meetings. But with this research, I can get why there is that extra demand when it comes to that video experience versus in person. And I'm thankful that you said this. There are things that the host can do to ease some of these. 100%. And that is really one of the things that I want to get across. And in fact, I believe this, I named this wrong. So what I wanted to say is, do not get complacent. When you hear research like this, you might think, oh, that's just a fact. Zoom meetings and video conferencing is just more draining and more exhausting. That's just the truth of it. So nothing I can do. That's BS, because we have all been on calls that have either gone by quickly or that we're surprised by how quickly it ended, or how much we enjoyed ourselves and how engaged we were. Maybe we built rapport and built relationships with people. I mean, amazing things can happen when you actually put the time and effort into running a high quality call. And so this is my key takeaway, is that yes, Zoom fatigue may be real, and maybe looking into the camera not only helps you connect with other people on the other side, but can also alleviate these. However, at the end of the day, you can absolutely do things to have people feel more engaged, to feel like they can turn off their camera and walk around and have that mobility, to be able to interact in small groups, to be feeling like they belong. And that is really one of the things that I like to say when it comes to engagement, is everyone on the call, when they feel like I'm supposed to be here, I matter, I'm heard and I'm seen, that makes a different experience. But when you're on a call where you feel invisible, like nobody would notice if you just suddenly disappeared, that's a totally, totally different experience altogether. And so do not get complacent. Do not think just because it's a thing that there's nothing you can do about it, because that's not true. You can absolutely do stuff. And yeah, so I see actually here, there's a great comment. On Zoom, I can sit and then stand up a lot more than in person. And depending on your situation and how you've set yourself up, there are meetings where I will actually, because of how my desk is positioned, where I can actually just adjust my monitor ever so slightly if I'm using my built-in camera, and I can just stand up and continue the meeting. And so I can move around. Like right now, I'm standing. So I could be on a Zoom call, and if I'm just listening, I can kind of move around gently, kind of move my body so I can get blood flowing. However, I would say if you've ever been on a Zoom call where another person is just taking you with them on a laptop or a mobile device around their house, that can actually be really distracting. So as a host, I always recommend, if you want to get up and move around, feel free to turn off your camera, and you can always give them the space to do that. My whole thing is to try and focus on being present on camera when you are, say, in a small group or interacting with others in a breakout room, or if we're having a discussion, that's where I would have it focus. But if you were teaching something or we're just going through it, feel free to turn off your camera and move around. And if you're doing a good job running a meeting where people are staying engaged, it doesn't matter if they're walking around or not, they will still be paying attention to the meeting. Okay. So, okay. I'm seeing, can you link? So I can add that after the fact. You can also, if you search the Stanford Zoom fatigue research, you will probably come up. The university has its own sort of press release that narrows it down. So you don't have to read the entire full research paper, but you can read the Stanford summary of it, which I do find really interesting. And so Rod is saying here, I teach on Zoom 40 hours a week. That is a lot of time. I know Rod has long days teaching, and I always tell people to turn off their cameras. It is such a kindness to be able to do that. So when you're conscious of this research and you're conscious of what's going on, anytime you can incorporate ways to help alleviate some of that, that is absolutely a good thing. And thinking in advance about when you can actually do that. All right. So, and Rod is saying, one of the reasons I'm loving the transition to Ecamm for Zoom is complacency, because you can add a lot of things. So yeah, whether you are using Ecamm or something like OBS, or just using tools for engagement, or doing simple things like increasing your enthusiasm on camera, looking into the camera, addressing the people, talking to them like every person belongs there. Those are all things that you can do to increase engagement and to make the meeting flow smoother. So that is not Netflix fatigue. That is Zoom fatigue and why it happens. Also with any video conferencing. So the main takeaway messages for me today when I talk about this subject is, one, to understand that yes, it is a real thing. However, we can do some simple things. From your standpoint, practicing looking in the camera can absolutely help alleviate some of these things. But at the end of the day, we all have more control over making a better meeting than the current status quo. There is a lot of just boring stuff out there. And just like a boring in-person meeting, we can turn things around. We can make it more engaging. We can make people actually excited to be there. And we do not have to be complacent. Just because it's real does not mean that we don't have more control to make a better experience for everyone on the call.